Who can take a flower, roll it up and make it fine, sprinkle it with knowledge and a little bit of time, cover it with headlines and a sweet euphoria too. Cannabis man, cannabis man, cannabis man, spreading news and joy across the land, diving deep into the growing green. Cannabis man, we're all king.
Well, hello there, and welcome into another episode of the Cannabis Man podcast. Thank you so much for clicking on the show and giving this a listen. I am your host, Don Kleppen, and if it's your first time here, welcome. This is a show where we're trying to take a more journalistic look at all things legal cannabis. I'm here in Chicago, Illinois, which legalized recreational cannabis back in 2020, and I've been a personal user of going on close to 20 years here of cannabis. I found just after high school, as a late sort of teen-aged person, 18, 19 years old, my friends introduced me to it then, and I found that it really helped me get to sleep, along with enjoying it socially, like at parties and whatnot. I noticed that the nights of sleep after using it were some of the best I'd had, and I always struggled my whole life as a young person getting to sleep at night. And so that was something that allowed me, or led me really, to make cannabis a regular part of my life and routine. I also find it helped with things like social anxiety, dealing with stress, recovering from exercise or workouts, just a whole gamut of kind of quality of life issues. And so that led me to keeping cannabis a part of my regular life. And working as a broadcaster here in Chicago radio, when it became legal, I was very excited for the conversations that I had had over the years with people at parties, friends of mine, other people in the cannabis space, other can-enthusiasts like myself. Those conversations never really materialized into mainstream media, and they still haven't. We get much more of the continued stereotypes from last century, the propaganda of reefer madness. Anybody who went to public education like I did remembers the DARE police officers coming into classrooms in the 80s and 90s, showing us the videos of scrambled eggs and telling us the dangers of drugs. And what I came to realize is that so many of the people who repeated that propaganda and messaging, they might not have done so out of malice. It's not like they were complicit in the propaganda. They just didn't know any better. When I think about the authority figures who passed on these messages, they didn't know about cannabis for themselves because they might not have tried it. Or even if they did feel differently about it, they didn't want to go against the grain and sort of tell people the truth, the subjective truth as they had found it out, and go against the government's messaging, the DEA, all of this major machinery at work, continuing the negative stereotyping of propaganda. And so, all of that to say, that's kind of what led me to starting this show a few years back. I wanted to bring the conversations about cannabis in terms of what it can offer you in terms of quality of life improvements, and I wanted to bring those conversations to a medium that would be accessible to you, and that was the genesis for the Cannabis Man podcast. So on this show, I speak with experts in the space, whether they're doctors, researchers who are studying the plant in their labs and finding things out about them, if they are professors, people who are teaching classes about this new green frontier legal cannabis spaces like Oakton or Southern Illinois University, or so many university and higher learning institutions out there now that offer cannabis courses. I like talking with them. Business owners, entrepreneurs, people who have created products or services in the cannabis space that you and I now get to enjoy, or policymakers, people who are creating the laws in different states that we now need to abide by, and those will be the foundation for legal cannabis going forward. I also will talk with other podcasters or journalists, people who are in the space like I am covering it, and I like to bring all of that perspective to you here on this show. I also will bring news stories. I want to keep you up to date on the latest movements in the legal cannabis space, and there's been so much of that over the last, certainly this past year's been a big one, but really the last decade, this space has been just teeming with change. change. And there's been so much of it that me doing this weekly podcast, it's not really enough to get all of the news and perspective out to you to really get my arms around all these changes. And so that led me to launching the weekly Chronic newsletter, which I launched last month in October. And it's a weekly newsletter that comes out Tuesday mornings. And it's another opportunity for me to share with you news stories that don't make it onto these shows, giving you perspective, my opinion about certain things relating to legal cannabis. I give you some behind-the-scenes looks at various cannabis events that I go to, what goes into making this show, product reviews, just like I do here. And so you can subscribe to that at the link below. You can also get more from the Cannabis Man podcast on social media. It's at C-Man Podcast on Twitter and Instagram, and it's the Cannabis Man podcast Facebook page and YouTube channels. And you can always get in touch with me there on social media, or you can text the show. There's a link in the description notes below that says text Cannabis Man. Any question I ask in the show, any question you might have for a guest that comes up, or a product that I talk about, or if you've tried one of the products I mention, I've got some great ones to tell you about later today. If you've tried any of those and you want to weigh in, let me know your opinion. Text the show by clicking that link in the description notes, and I'll get your message. As I mentioned, there has been a lot of cannabis news, certainly the last few weeks with the election in the U.S., but this whole year has been big with the rescheduling, public comment period, the administrative hearing, which was set for a long time at December 2nd. Now it's been moved to early next year in 2025. But either way, we'll have an administrative judge make a ruling one way or the other on rescheduling cannabis. And President-elect Trump in the U.S. here has been announcing some of his cabinet appointments, how it always goes with a new president. He is announcing with press releases the politicians, as well as service members, anybody else who he's appointing to his administration. Well, he has released some of those names, and one of them has some big implications for cannabis reform, and I'm going to get detailed into that later in the show. I also have a guest conversation like I always try and bring to you, and my expert conversation in the space today is a CEO of a social equity cannabis company here in Illinois, but this guy has been in the space for a long time. He was in a high level starting a company that ended up becoming Verano, one of the big multi-state operators around cannabis that expanded from Illinois. But he also was originally on the Cannabis Business Association of Illinois. So he has been in this state of Illinois, but in the legal cannabis field and really establishing some of the norms there from the very beginning. And his perspective on this is really, really invaluable, and I know you're going to love the conversation. That's coming up later in the show as well. Of course, I've got the product reviews to tell you about and the news joint wrap, looking at some local news stories and events coming up and reviews as well. And later on in the show, I want to debut something new. I've had an idea for a segment on the show for a while now. Wasn't exactly sure what form it would take, but I think it's something you might enjoy, and that's coming up later too. So just stick around. A lot to get to on this episode of the Cannabis Man Podcast.
This is Tommy Chong, and you're listening to the Cannabis Broadcast.
And here we are, rolling into the show now. Thank you so much for joining in. If you haven't already, do me a favor and leave a rating or a review for this show. However you're listening to this, if it's Spotify, Apple, YouTube, iHeart, whichever platform or internet website or app you're using to get this show right now, there is some function on there for you to leave a comment, to leave a rating or a review, 5 stars, whatever you think it's worth that I'm doing here for you. Those reviews help me stand out from other podcasts, and they've already done really great work sort of helping this one stand out, because this show has been recognized on the Good Pods platform as the number one indie news podcast out there among all the millions of podcasts out there in the world. This is the number one indie news podcast on Good Pods, so thank you so much for that. It's also a top 5 in terms of cannabis news and society and culture. So I love that recognition. I really appreciate the reviews and the comments that you've left thus far, and if you haven't already, go ahead and do that for me. I'd really appreciate it. Got a lot to get to today, so let's jump right into the News Joint Wrap. This is a wrap-up of news stories, events, and reviews, all relating to cannabis, and it's all brought to you by IllinoisNewsJoint.com. Think of it as the joint you can hit for all your Illinois cannabis news and reviews. And let's start with the battle over Illinois hemp regulations heats up again. Jason Brown, who started Illinois News Joint, put out an article last week on November 6th. And this gets at something I saw this week too, which is the Chicago Tribune editorial board put out an article relating to the potential hemp ban in Illinois. So this battle is heating up, and let's get into what Jason says in his article here. He goes, on the heels of the Illinois Department of Agriculture announcing a second notice for proposed amendments involving provisions to the Illinois Industrial Hemp Act that would regulate and redefine how THC and THCA levels are measured, essentially banning hemp and hemp products in Illinois. Those are in parentheses from Jason. Representative Sonia M. Harper introduced an alternative hemp regulation reform bill, House Bill 5903, that would also regulate hemp, but without altering the legal definition of hemp set forth in the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018, which is also known as that 2018 Farm Bill that I've talked about a lot on the show, and that effectively legalized hemp across the U.S. And ever since that happened, there has been a lot of hubbub about it, but more importantly, there has been a whole industry worth of products that have cropped up in the interim. I'm talking about hemp-based beverages. I'm talking about, hemp-based edibles that you can buy across state lines because they officially, with this legal definition, fall under the protected hemp product. And hemp products have under a certain threshold of THC. That would be the 0.3% of THC that qualifies a hemp product. Jason goes on in the article to really give some great information about this battle and the details on both sides. I have linked it below. By all means, take a read and see for yourself what's going on. Another news story here from IllinoisNewsJoint.com. Municipal and county cannabis retailers' occupation tax rate to change January 1st. Also an article from last week, courtesy of Jason Brown. This is from Illinois Department of Revenue, IDOR. They put out an informational bulletin for all dispensaries engaged in the business of selling adult use cannabis at retail in taxing jurisdictions that have enacted municipal or county cannabis retailers' occupation taxes. Effective January 1st of 2025, certain taxing jurisdictions have, by ordinance, imposed or changed their municipal or county cannabis retailers' occupation tax on the gross receipts from sales of adult use cannabis. Here's the main meat of this story. The taxes are in addition to Illinois retailers' occupation tax on general merchandise, which is 6.25%, and any locally imposed retailers' occupation tax on general merch, which also apply to sales of adult use cannabis. Cash registers and computer programs must be adjusted so that beginning on January 1st of next year, the corrected tax rate is collected and paid. To verify your new combined state and local retailers' occupation tax rates, on adult use cannabis, you can go to the My Tax Illinois tax rate finder at mytax.illinois.gov and select rates for January of 2025. So that is where you can find out specifically what your tax rate is, the new one after January 1st. I have linked that below as well. So you click on that, and if you have a cannabis business and your tax rates are going to change in Illinois, you can see exactly what they'll be. And then back to this hemp definition battle here. The most recent story by Jason Brown just came out today from when I'm recording this, which is November 14th. And there was a meeting on Tuesday of this week by JCAR, the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. And as Jason notes in the headline here, Illinois officials backtrack on new hemp definition. So that was the battle that I was just referencing before. This meeting saw officials backtracking on implementing the new hemp definition set forth by the Department of Agriculture and admitted language about transportation of industrial hemp that had been deleted from the new rulemakings, quote, was a track change error in the back and forth on some of the drafts. Tuesday, JCAR released an updated draft for its second notice that reverted the definition of hemp back to realign with the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018, the Farm Bill, and returned the transportation of industrial hemp language back into the new draft. What does this mean? Well, as Jason notes right in the headline, that language change really does back off of the effort to ban hemp products. As Jason explains later in the article, during that meeting, David Lakeman, the division manager for cannabis and hemp at IDOA, reiterated 3 times that the new rulemakings were not intended to change the definition of hemp and that, quote, IDOA has no authority or intent to ban hemp products via the rulemaking process, end quote. IDOA did consider and incorporate stakeholder comments throughout the new rulemaking's first and second notices, Jason notes. More details go on in this article, which again is also linked below. Couple of recent reviews here. Blood Moon Moon Dust Infused Shake by Caviar, Grape Sugar Cookies Terp Sugar by Dabstract, a lot of sugar in there. A dispensary spotlight includes Verilife in Rosemont, and High Dose Sodas review by CQ. All of that, along with more information about the news stories I shared with you and events coming up in and around Illinois, all relating to legal cannabis, at IllinoisNewsJoint.com. Now I'd like to get into my products of the week, and I'm recording this in the early afternoon. It's about 3:30 on November 14th. It's a Thursday. Violet is napping, Gretchen's finishing up her workday, and I've got my second cup of coffee here, which sometimes I'll have one of those between 2 and 4 p.m. on a weekday if I'm just feeling like it. And first of all, cheers. Gotta love a good cup of coffee in the morning or early afternoon. Why not? And the reason I bring that up, though, is because I normally drink my coffee black. It's kind of how I like it, and I love combining it with a good sativa strain of cannabis. It's one of my favorite ways to start the day, is by combining caffeine and cannabis. Caffeinabis is sometimes how I jokingly describe it. With Gretchen, I also mentioned that in the weekly Chronic newsletter this week. But this cup of coffee is not black. I put a little creamer in it, and I also put an infused powder. So I've got my caffeinabis all in this one cup of coffee. And I'm going to get into details about that infused powder that's in this cup of coffee on another episode. What I'm going to tell you about on this episode, first product is a pre-roll of some flower courtesy of Verano's The Essence, Jay's 1 gram Berry Bliss. A pre-roll I got courtesy of the Sunnyside in Wrigleyville, harvested May 23rd, packaged October 2nd. Advised use-by date is July 8th of 2025. THCA in this package, 22.8%. Total with all the other minor cannabinoids noted, 25.319%. Berry Bliss, it was on sale. Sunnyside at Wrigleyville does tend to run some pretty good sales, so I ran over there, and I enjoy getting pre-rolls. Normally I'll get a big pack, but this time I had just an eighth of some other flower, and so I felt like just getting one of these large gram pre-rolls. And I smoked on this, I want to say it took me 2 days. I smoked about half of it last week, and then the other half a day or so later. And I enjoyed the taste. I wouldn't say it was necessarily berry or fruity, but it was light and enjoyable. One thing I dislike about the nutrition label here is they do not note the terpenes listed, but I will say I noticed a little bit of limonene in there just because of the lift that I got from it. The buzz I got from this, it's officially noted as a hybrid, but I felt more of a sativa vibe from it, and it lifted me up the way I needed it to be. Not too out of sorts. It's not like I was, floating in the ether there up in my mind. I was totally feet on the ground, ready to do whatever I needed to do, but it took the edge off, put me in a place later in the day where I wanted to be, and that was very enjoyable. Not something I'd necessarily write home about, but this Berry Bliss, if they have it on sale again, I will get the pre-roll. It was kind of a fatter roll, as well as you might know what I mean, sometimes you kind of have that widening as you go from the base of the joint out to the tip. A lot of pre-rolls, especially 1 grams, get thicker and more round as you get out to the tip of it down versus the base and the mouthpiece. Well, this one was pretty even. It had a fat mouthpiece, and it was just a perfectly even cylinder all the way from front to back, and I did kind of like that. It was a little bit easier for me to put it out and save half of it in the tube for the next day. So I did like it. I would probably give it a 6 or 7 out of 10, mainly because, the combustion now these days, since I've been using the Dynavap so much, it really does, the taste is just not what I'm loving so much anymore. I really like the way that dry herb vaporizing gives you a sort of real pop of the flavors of the flower strains, whereas when you go back to combustion from getting used to that, you just taste the burn. I find that a lot of the weed strains that I'm combusting and smoking now really just taste very similar. That might be different for gasoline or some of those stronger tastes, but I don't really get into those. I mainly stick to like the citrusy floral vibes, and so those kind of get ruined by the combustion. So 6 or 7 out of 10 here. But the real gem that I have been getting into this week, and I've been so excited to really kind of give you my thoughts on this. This is another product from my friends at Sweet Buzz. Sweet Buzz has been doing some amazing things. You may recall my interview with Elisa Brill. Lovely woman. She was at the Best in Grass after party, the awards ceremony as well. And we were getting to talking. And, as she said during her interview on this show, Sweet Buzz is made up of candy people, and so they know how to make delicious candy treats. So the sweet part of it, they've had down for a long, long time, but they're infusing these sweet treats now. And I'm telling you, almost everything of theirs that I have tried can stand on the shelf next to the classic candy brands, and you would hardly notice a difference, except that you're getting a buzz after eating these things. And that was the case with the product of theirs that I tried this week. I've been kind of going through their Sweet Somethings multi-pack, for which they won a Silver Best in Grass award at that ceremony that I was referencing a little bit ago. But I've been going through their multi-pack to try their different cups. I talked about their peanut butter cups on a recent episode. I reviewed something else of theirs along with their Sweet Sparks. I talked a lot about those, which are kind of the M&Ms that they do. Those are amazing. And by the way, the Sweet Sparks After Dark, which have CBN in them and a dark purple colored candy shell, those are out in Illinois dispensaries right now. And I talked about those on a recent episode. If you're somebody like me that looks for a little bit of help getting to sleep at night, CBN is a real kicker. And to have basically an M&M, this Sweet Spark, a little chocolate candy coated with a shell that has THC and CBN in it, 1 milligram of each, so it's easily dosable. Having those around has been amazing. My wife Gretchen, who is really slowly getting her tolerance back after being pregnant and delivering Violet and whatnot earlier this year, she's just slowly getting her tolerance back, and she has been loving the Sweet Sparks After Dark from Sweet Buzz. Those things are great to have around, and it's easy to take 2, 3, or 4 of them like I've been doing if you have a little bit more of a tolerance. But all of that is background. The product I want to tell you about today is another cup from their Sweet Somethings multi-pack. The Sweet Buzz Cookie Got Creamed cup is the one I'm telling you about today. This is a white chocolate cup, sort of reminiscent of the Hershey's Cookies and Cream bar, if you've ever had those. White chocolate speckled with dark colored cookie bits throughout. It's a bit sweeter than typical milk chocolate and very tasty. I really enjoyed this cup. And if I wasn't such a huge fan of peanut butter cups in general, this would have taken my top spot in the Sweet Somethings multi-pack because it is right there. It is that good. Their peanut butter cup is really stellar, and I could have those, as many of those as were put in front of me. But that is also true of these Cookie Got Creamed. Very tasty, reminiscent of cookies and milk as well. If you're like any of us that dunked an Oreo into a cup of milk at any point during your childhood or adulthood, you get a little bit of reminiscent taste of that with these cookie got creamed cups from Sweet Buzz. Now, something that was really noteworthy to me was the satisfying crunch of the cookie bits inside the cup. That is not something that's always doable, and I was really impressed by that piece of the texture portion of the experience of eating the cookie got creamed. When you put in something that's meant to maintain a crunch, but it's in something liquidy like caramel or peanut butter, that crunch does not always stick around. Sometimes it gets a little softer, sometimes the taste changes. That doesn't happen at all with these cookie got creamed. It is wonderfully sweet. The texture of the white chocolate on the outside is firm enough for a satisfying bite, and every time you chew it, I got a satisfying cookie crunch in every single bite. And I was thinking that's due to more overall cookie pieces spread throughout the cup. Each bite has a nice crunch. The sweetness lingers a while on the sides of the tongue. That was something specifically that I noted. I got very stoned in the night afterward, and that's because I ended up having 3 of those cups. I was really unable to stop myself, and I met up with some friends of mine downtown. We had a beer, and they were making note of my red eyes and kind of the state that I was in. Had a really great time. It was not a problem for me at all, and I enjoyed the company of my buddies Dan and Will and Joe. The stoned vibe was just very, very pleasant. And I just enjoyed the hell out of these cookie got creamed cups from Sweet Buzz. So these are the kind of white chocolate ones, and if you're looking around for Illinois dispensaries and you see Sweet Buzz, you really can't go wrong with any of their products. But if you can get their Sweet Somethings multi-pack, that's a great way to try all of the different cups they have. But if you're going to go with one, the peanut butter cups or the cookie got creamed, you will enjoy those, and you can thank me later. And you can also thank me later for turning you on to the only cannabis rewards app you'll ever need. Cannabis Rewards. You may not have heard those words combined before, but I'm telling you, there's a reason that they are now, and that's High Rewards. This is an app which you can download on your Apple or Android smartphones, and every time you go into a dispensary, wherever you are, whichever state you're in, and whichever dispensary you're in, you go into that dispensary and you open up your High Rewards app. Let them use your location, and then you can check in at that dispensary just by walking in the door. And you open the app and they give you points just for being there. Then, when you get your product at the counter, talking to the bud tenders and deciding if you feel like a hybrid or sativa or whatever it is you're looking for, so now you've got your bundle, and they're ringing you up and they're checking you out. When you get that receipt from the bud tender and your purchase is made, you scan that receipt into the High Rewards app, and you'll get a crap ton of more points that way. And these points can be redeemed for real cash value. Go into their store and you can see all of the different gift cards that you can get with these points. We're talking huge companies like Amazon, Walmart, Target, or if you're a gamer like me, PlayStation, Xbox. And you can get points on High Rewards other ways than just by buying products and going to dispensaries. You can take surveys, you can watch videos, you can play mobile games, and you can invite your friends. By sharing a link, you will get 5,000 points when your friends download High Rewards and go into a dispensary as well. And, by the way, for listening to this show, and because I'm telling you about it, if you download High Rewards and you input the promo code CANMAN, CANNMAN, like cannabis, put in the promo code CANMAN and you can get $5, no questions asked, right there in your app, available for you to use. So you can download High Rewards at the link below in these description notes, and don't forget to put in the promo code CANMAN for $5. And like I said, thank me later, because hey, you're already getting high, might as well get highly rewarded too. Listener, very excited to bring to you this conversation with my guest today. You know I talk a lot about legal cannabis in Illinois, and this guest has been in it from the very beginning. He worked at a company called Ataraxia, which became Verano, which obviously has grown well past Illinois' borders, and he moved on to focusing more on minority-owned and social equity cannabis companies here in the state, and he also was the first and longest-serving serving chairman of what is now the Cannabis Business Association of Illinois. So he has been there from the beginning. He's seen the journey in Illinois cannabis from then to now. And I'm very, very excited to talk with him about all of these things, as well as his latest venture, which he is the CEO of Green Rose Dispensary, which just added a third location in Harwood Heights on top of River North and Lincolnwood. So listener, please welcome, if you would, the Chief Executive Officer of Green Rose, Ross Morreale. Welcome, Ross.
Thanks, Don. Thanks for having me.
If you wouldn't mind, let's just start with you and tell us a little about how you were a lawyer, you were working just kind of in legal departments, and then you got into legal cannabis very early, back when it was first starting. So just tell us about how you jumped into the cannabis space here.
Sure. No problem. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about cannabis. So it started in 2015, end of 2014. I was an attorney, doing a lot of corporate legal type work, and opportunity came up to maybe apply for these licenses back in 2015, and partner with a couple of people, and manage the application process, and which was interesting in and of itself. And then ended up winning one of the 21 cultivation center licenses, and started Ataraxia, which is the first company that, Verano's first company. Verano didn't exist at the time, but later evolved. That would be the first asset of it, the first operational entity, a lot of the first products. Now there's more brands, obviously, but it all started, right there in Southern Illinois in 2015. So it was an exciting time, a lot of work, a lot of struggles, but it was very, very interesting. Wouldn't change my course at all. It was a very cool experience, and felt lucky to be a part of it, quite honestly. And was also involved with the Medical Cannabis Alliance, as you mentioned, at the same time. These ran parallel. We had a new industry that was starting, and there was no industry organization to represent our interests. So kind of those ran parallel, and served as the chairman for the first, I think it was 3 years, might have been 3.5, but from 2015 to 18 or so. And it's just interesting to see how everything's changed so much since then, and the things we used to talk about at those board meetings about adding conditions, getting rid of fingerprints and all of those initial, impediments to access that are now gone. And since then, the states, obviously, the General Assembly and governors have, passed adult use, and now everyone over 21 has access. So there's been a lot of good developments over the years. Almost 10 years, actually, as we're coming up upon it now.
Yeah, I mean, and that is really interesting, because that gives you a vantage point that many other people did not share, who are in this space now, and they didn't see it come from those humble beginnings when there was no framework. There are people, obviously, every year the state, I believe, holds the license lotteries, and people apply for them, and we have, thankfully, I remember when the state did give its first adult rec use licenses out, there were a lot of lawsuits. I've talked about them on the show, which kind of held up those operations from getting going. And so only now, it's 2024, only like last year and this year have we really gotten many other competing, especially social equity license holders, getting their businesses up and going, which has been great. It's helped with giving consumers more options. It's helped bring some prices down in Illinois. But you've been able to see all of this happen from the very beginning. So if you could talk just a little bit about what you've seen change from those days in 2015 to now, here almost 10 years later in Illinois, regarding legal cannabis.
Boy, there's been so many changes over the course of that time period. It was kind of hard to know which direction to go with that one.
Sure, I get it. Yeah.
I mean, I guess one of the changes that the public may recognize, or maybe not even realize, but they experience, is just you had access to fewer products in the beginning, and even 3 years ago. So you'd go to a dispensary, and all the big companies do business with each other. and they have all their relationships, and it's hard to get into those stores. Whereas the new round of social equity category licenses on the dispensary side, at least what Green Rose does, and I think a lot of other dispensaries do too, is they carry more products. They're carrying more of the craft grow products. They're carrying more of the original cultivation center products, and that I think maybe is one of the best. Along with prices, I think there's some better deals out there too. So I think you're from the consumer standpoint, the cannabis consumer standpoint, you should be able to have more dispensaries to go to, and some of those dispensaries, the newer ones, probably have better selection and more brands. And the biggest reason being because they're not producing their own product, which is what all the big companies do, and they all do it. It's this business. They want to sell as much of their own wholesale stuff as they can. So the consumer is going to see, if you go to a Curaleaf store, for example, you're going to see 40% of grassroots, give or take. And same thing with if you go to a Sunnyside store, you're going to see 40% at least of Cresco products there.
Right.
Sure. And they all do that. I'm not just assuming. You could say the same thing about Dunleap and Verano and Rise and GTI, and everybody does that. It's just how it is. It's just in their interest to do that, and a lot of them have really good products, so it's not hard for them to achieve that. But there's more, I guess, shelf space available at some of the newer stores, and that means you can see more brands. And at Green Rose, we carry, we have a lot of vendors, and we really want to give, as many new craft grow and infuser operators a chance to sell. And, what the public does at that point is up to the public, up to the consumers, and we can only give them the opportunity to sell their products, which we try to do whenever we can.
There has been, just in the last few years that I've been doing the show, there's been a noticeable change in the amount of SKUs, the amount of products available at different dispensaries, plus the price point. That was something that, I talked a lot about on the show early on. I got a lot of crap from people for talking about Illinois, and I thought they were doing things, differently than other states, but I thought they were setting themselves up for success because in states like, we've seen now, in states like Colorado, in Oregon, even in California, some parts of it, and it looks kind of like Michigan may be set up along the same paths. When you open the doors and let anyone get a dispensary license, it kind of becomes a race to the bottom in those markets because they're really competing like gas stations do, where you have to go lower by a penny or you have to drive your price down in order to get people in your doors. But that sort of removes the incentive, or it can anyway. It can lower the incentive for people to make high quality products. And I know that Illinois, our prices maybe were stubbornly high for a while here, but the quality has been consistently high. And I think now that competition's bringing prices down, but the quality is still up there. And that's where I think Illinois got it right compared to some other states. And you mentioned Green Rose before, and I want to talk to you about those because there are only 3 locations of this dispensary, but I believe it is a social equity company. And as you just mentioned, you are giving space on your shelves for like the craft growers in Illinois, which I think is really important because it gives consumers more options to try stuff, which, kind of like the micro brews, or the home brews in the alcohol industry. Those can launch some successful brewery lines, and people love it when they get to try a new beer on the market, and then that kind of launches a successful company. It's kind of like getting in on a band before they hit it big. And I feel like there's the opportunity for that with cannabis too. So if you can, tell us a little about Green Rose and how it got started and a little about the new location in Harwood Heights.
Happy to do it. So Green Rose is, I can name a brand that I've been working on for, many years, before even these new applications came out. Didn't know what to do with it. Just something in my head. Even from 2015, I was using Green Rose and stuff, never publicly, but just, privately. Mm-hmm. So when new licenses came out, I have a consulting firm, was helping applicants and groups, apply for the licenses in 2020 and 2021. And the idea was to, help them through operations, help them through, and then, build a Green Rose dispensary brand, with putting various licenses together and helping various groups. Some just want to, be out and they don't want to do anything. And I think that's becoming more common, meaning like the people that have won the licenses, just because it's hard. And that's, I think, you asked about differences. That's a big difference, which the consumer doesn't care about. It's probably to their benefit, but the business is much harder now than it was back then, like on the business side of it. And I think that you mentioned some delays earlier, with, getting the licenses, the new social equity licenses, awarded and issued and put out there. A couple of years really helped the big companies because they had, basically free reign for the first 2 years of adult use. And it wasn't really set up to be that way.
Right.
But that's the way it played out. And I think that and just the overall cannabis market nationally has really made it difficult for new companies to succeed financially.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that some of that changes. But I talked to a lot of different groups. It's hard. It's hard for us. I mean, it's hard.
Yeah, for sure. I get that. And I hear that from a lot of guests on the show, too. It's people put in a lot of cases, especially with these social equity license lotteries that they're going for, people put in a lot of money to just, time and the money. And then there's paperwork and there's a lot to it. And obviously, all about this. But it's just the fact that, now the competition is greater, and it's people have to gather the funds and the resources to even put their hand in to try and win one of these licenses. And there's obviously no guarantee of that either. And so I can only imagine how back in 2015 when you're first getting started versus now, the crowds out there, the amount of people who are vying for the same amount of spots in the business rosters, that alone, that increased number of people who are interested, that alone has to make it a lot more difficult. And that, obviously you deal with this with Green Rose, the consulting firm as well that you're working for, because as you're talking here, it's clear that, you've been in this for a while, the back end of it, as in big companies as well as startups, whether social equity or not. And so you're offering this consulting for people through Green Rose Advisors who may be interested in getting into these, spaces as well. And so, when you are consulting people, what are some of the first things you tell them just in terms of what they should know before kind of getting their feet wet in this space?
I think it depends on how they're coming to it. If they have a license, if they don't have a license, if they already have a license and they, won it through this most recent round that the state did in the simplified process where they issued, I think, 50 licenses recently. It was earlier this year.
Right.
I know some people that won those and that took 10 minutes. So I think that took away, it's harder to win because now a lot more people can do it. But that removes all the barriers to applying, I guess.
Okay.
It was very, very nominal and easy. So if you have one of those licenses, I told the guy the other day, you should probably just sell it. Do you really want to unless you really have some desire to operate a business, there's other businesses you can operate that are a lot easier, quite honestly, at this point. And I brought up, earlier about the difference between Illinois and California and some of these other markets and pricing and so on and so forth. It really stems from the regulations. It's expensive to operate compliantly. If you're a producer or a retailer, just between security and all the packaging requirements and just all the compliance items that you have to satisfy, it increases the cost where other states don't have that. So nobody talks about that, but it is the costs are just higher to operate. So the prices need to be higher. I think they were probably too high in the beginning. And like you mentioned earlier, they seem to be coming down a little bit. Hopefully you still see that a little, but I don't see it being like those other markets that you mentioned, just because there's a lot more that you have to pay to operate here.
And I agree with you totally. I think that, those are examples. The other states we're talking about, like I mentioned earlier, I kind of hold those up as examples of where you don't want to be. And I feel like even though it may be harder from the business side of things for operators to get in on the ground floor of Illinois to get their businesses up and running, that difficulty, those obstacles that people then have to kind of, overcome, it just, even though it might make it hard for a lot of people to get in, I think that also has another effect where you keep a lot of, I don't want to say lazy or bad actors, but it keeps people out who might not otherwise be doing the right stuff when they do get in. I guess what I mean to say is the people who really want to get in for the right reasons, I think that they are more likely, that is, to get in over these obstacles that Illinois has thrown up, and thereby stick it out and get their products to consumers who then can enjoy it and don't have to worry about a dip in quality. Whereas in these other state markets, that's exactly what we're seeing unfold over these last couple of years. And some people say it's corrective, but it feels to me like they were kind of set up the wrong way from the get-go, whereas Illinois, I feel, has done it, better. Talking about product philosophies that way, where we're talking about the actors that come into the space and which products make it to store shelves and what people want to give to consumers as options when they're out shopping at dispensaries. What are some of the things that Green Rose looks at when you're deciding which products to put on your shelves? I know some of the bigger companies, like you said, they make these things in-house, but at Green Rose, you mentioned you guys are giving some craft growers opportunities to have shelf space too. So talk a little about the product philosophy you guys have at Green Rose.
I think, especially with the River North location where people come from all over the world, about a third of the business there are tourists. So you have people all over the United States and international travelers come through, downtown. I just want to give everybody a chance. We've had some issues with some vendors where we had like product complaints, and sometimes you have to pull back until they figure it out, because it's hard. It's hard. You're making products, especially, growing flower is one thing. It's either good or when you start making products, you can run into some other issues. And I just think it takes a little bit to get some of the formulas right and the flavorings and just the consistency and then so on and so forth. So I think just general philosophy is we want to do what in a lot of sense when it comes to product selection, what the big companies aren't doing. And that's, carrying more stuff, giving consumers more options.
That's great.
In general, that's what I want to give them better deals on those brands too. Because that's the other side of it is, if you're in, when you pick any of the big companies, doesn't matter which one, they're only going to let their competing big companies do so much promotional stuff within their retail stores. So that's why if you go to any one of them, you'll see they run, whoever owns it, you're going to see their stuff on sale the most. And then you're going to see the other 4 or 5 big companies on sale once in a while, but not a lot, because they want you to buy their stuff.
Right.
That's why they have those stores where we do deals across all brands. Like we did a buy 2 get 1 for Harwood Heights grand opening, where it was probably, I don't know what it was 3,000 products to choose from.
Wow.
Buy 2 get 1 with all of Verano, all of GTI, all of Cresco, and all of Arise. So those 4 companies, which are the 4 largest producers in Illinois, buy 2 get 1 mix and match. So you can pick one product from one product from another. You could pick all same to 3, all same to 3. All 3 same products if you wanted to. Is up to the consumer. That's like one of our more popular sales. We usually do that around grand opening or for holiday type things. But that's just one example that I don't think anyone did that prior to us. Just because the big companies would never do that, because it's like they're putting everyone on par, and they would never put like their own wholesale products like in the same promo as their competitors' wholesale products.
Yeah, no, that is really cool. And I think that's a great example, Ross, because that is the kind of thing that, as you say, when they're big and they've got their own brands, they're going to put their thumb on the scale to try and put those brands in front of the consumer more than the people who are making the product from the outside that they would then have to kind of kick out those earnings to. They would rather give themselves the best leg up that they can and sell you what they have. So if you're, as you mentioned earlier, we're talking about the big operators. If you're going into a Rise dispensary, you're going to see more Green Thumb. You're going to see deals on those. Sunnysides, which I enjoy, there's a Wrigleyville spot near me. I always go there, but they're always advertising Cresco products. They're always running sales on those because they want you to see those more, and hopefully you'll buy them more because they're just simply putting them in front of you. So I think it's really cool that Green Rose, you guys don't have that, and so everyone's playing on equal footing. And that means that, people who come into those doors, they are going to see everything, at least more on equal footing, and they can make their own decisions about what products they want to buy, not having to worry that they're only being shown a fraction of what the supply really is because you guys are looking to sell one brand over the other. And I just think that's a really cool philosophy. And I also think that sale is pretty great too. So I'm glad to hear that you guys do that, outside of just the grand openings and stuff, because I think there's certainly a lot of people around here who I'm sure are excited about that.
Yeah, it's a fun promotion. And as consumers, come into the store and they start selecting it, and the budtenders say, "Oh, well, you get to pick a third item, and you can choose from any of these." They're like, "Whoa, really?" So it's a pretty good promo. It's good for us. It brings a lot of people in, and it's good for the consumers because they get good deals and they get to try different stuff.
And I just want to say for the listener, I'm looking at the website greenroseil.com, and the 3 spots we're talking about. The River North location Ross just mentioned is 612 North Wells Street in Lincolnwood, 4656 Touhy Avenue, and then the new location in Harwood Heights is 4660 North Harlem. And you can check out any of these great brands that we're talking about on their store shelves. Ross Morreale, thank you again for stopping by. One last question before I let you go. When you're looking at the future of legal cannabis here, both inside Illinois and in other states and other countries around the world here that are legalizing, what's something that what's something you hope to see more of and something you think needs to be corrected?
I think, any of these prohibitionist type laws need to be corrected. For example, I'm a resident of Florida, and it's criminal to possess unless you're a patient there still. So wow. I know it's kind of I think that's going to change. That's been going on way too long. As far as things that should continue, or I think just the continued development of product. I mean, more availability, more access, and just, there's some categories probably that still haven't been developed. And I think research on how this stuff helps. I know I was just reading today that there's a research lab that's going to be working out of University of Illinois, I think. It was in the Sun-Times, the Tribune.
Oh, sure. Sure. Yeah. And they got the Cannabis Science Center down at SIU at Southern Illinois too. I know that one's pretty big. Yeah,
so I think that's something I like to see, expand a bit more. Is just that, and just the further development of products and different, safer delivery mechanisms.
I'm right there with you. I hope to see more of that. And hopefully, I know that it's been frustrating for Florida residents like you as this kind of is getting debated out in the political sphere. Hopefully that's something that changes and Florida gets added to the ranks like Illinois and like the other states in the U.S. that have given med patients and adult users the green light to use cannabis and make it a part of their daily lives. Ross Morreale, CEO of Green Rose Dispensaries and consultant at Green Rose Advisors. Thank you so much for stopping by today and just giving us some of your, lengthened perspective on, how cannabis has changed legally in Illinois and around the country. It's valuable perspective, man. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. Bye.
And there you have it, listener. I want to thank one more time my guest, Ross Morreale. Great conversation with him. It was really fascinating for me to hear the perspective of somebody who has been in this fight and specifically in Illinois' cannabis industry for so long. And not only for so long, some people can kind of be sitting in the same place for a long time. He went from a small company he started, which turned into a big MSO. He was on the first alliance of cannabis businesses, sitting on the board there. He's done with both of those now and decided to focus more on social equity. And that's what brought him to Green Rose dispensaries. So I haven't yet tried any products at Green Rose. If you have, or if you do, I would love to hear from you. Text me and tell me what you thought, what you had, and if you would go back again. Would love to hear that, but I love the philosophy that Ross was talking about here, and I look forward to seeing Green Rose do well in the future here in Illinois. Speaking of doing well in the future, I think a lot of us this year, especially in the cannabis space, were hoping that whoever got into the White House during this election, both major candidates, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, both of them pledged to move cannabis reform forward, to move toward legalization in their own ways. Well, as I mentioned at the top of the show, President-elect Trump has been naming his, nominations for his administration these last 2 weeks since he won the election on the 5th. One of those appointments is a Florida congressman named Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz has been in and out of the news over the years for a couple of different reasons, but the reason I'm bringing him up on this show is because one of the things that Matt Gaetz has become known for is his support of legalizing cannabis, certainly descheduling it, getting it off of Schedule 1. Matt Gaetz is an outspoken supporter of that. And President-elect Trump has nominated Matt Gaetz to lead the Justice Department. Trump has nominated him to be the Attorney General of the United States. And before I jump too far into that, I want to play for you a brief clip here where last year, 2023, in July, Matt Gaetz, on Capitol Hill, during a hearing, during a testimony from the DEA chief, Ann Milgram, Matt Gaetz asked Milgram, the DEA chief, point blank, why the process of rescheduling cannabis down from Schedule 1 had not yet moved forward. He asked her point blank to her face, which I think is something that all of us who are proponents of legalizing cannabis or descheduling it would have loved to have done. This guy did it. And take a listen for yourself.
From Florida, Mr. Gaetz.
So one reason people die from fentanyl is because they get addicted to opioids and get poisoned, right?
Yes.
And one reason that people get addicted to opioids is because they get prescribed opioids and that prescription turns into an addiction, right?
So I would absolutely say the beginning of the opioid epidemic started with unlawful prescribing.
Right. Not everyone, but that's a pretty large swath of the problem. And one of the reasons people get prescribed opioids is to deal with chronic pain, right?
Yes.
And throughout the country, there are people who use medical marijuana to treat chronic pain as an alternative to opioids, right?
I know a number of states have passed laws, yes, related to medical marijuana.
So I guess my question is this. Why has the Biden administration not taken marijuana off the list of Schedule I drugs?
So, Congressman, as you know, the president had sent a letter to the Secretary of HHS and to the Attorney General to ask for the descheduling process to begin. It's now with HHS. They are in that process. They start, then they send it to DEA. We have not received it yet.
That's encouraging. When do you expect to receive that recommendation from HHS?
I have not heard of a timeline from them, so I don't know.
Well, that's unsettling, isn't it? I mean, when you don't even know a timeline, it doesn't really make it seem like something's front of mind.
We have constant conversations with HHS and with FDA, but we have not been given a specific timeline.
Will you leave this briefing and encourage HHS to give you a timeline on getting that information to you?
I will ask.
Thank you. And when you receive the work product from HHS, is there any basis that DEA would have to oppose the descheduling of marijuana as a Schedule I drug?
So the way the scheduling process works under the law and the regulations is HHS does a review. They then send it to DEA. We then do what is known as an 8-factor review. There's an opportunity for public comment as well. And so we go through that part of the process. And so obviously we start with what HHS has provided us. We then go through our own review and a public comment process, and then we come to a scheduling decision.
And just share with me, with the country, what your perspective is on what the outcome of that should be.
Well, because I couldn't prejudge it at this point in time, I have not seen.
Do you have a personal view on whether or not marijuana should be a Schedule I drug?
As the head of the DEA, I will ultimately be responsible for signing off on what the scheduling is.
Will you consider in the analysis that's being done the studies that pretty extensively show that in states where there is medical marijuana access, there's a lower rate of prescribing these opioids that then can lead to addiction, which then can lead to the deaths that we've seen?
You have my full commitment, Congressman, that I will keep an open mind. I will look at all the research. I expect that we will get, additional public comment or research that comes in, and I will look at all of it.
And, Mr. Chairman, I'd seek unanimous consent to enter into the record a study conducted by two PhDs, Marie Hayes and Mark Brown, that looked at the prescribing of opioids in states with medical marijuana programs and indeed found that states with medical cannabis laws had a 24.8 lower mean annual opioid overdose mortality rate.
Without objection.
I really hope we get this done. We're 2 years into the Biden administration, and I honestly had hoped that by now we would have already descheduled marijuana from the Schedule I list. Maybe talk to me a little bit about the challenges that DEA has in this patchwork system where marijuana is federally illegal, but then hemp is allowed under the Farm Bill, and then you got people operating under the color of law in all these states. I mean, doesn't that seem like the least effective way to go about this?
If I could speak more generally about our diversion program, which is the unit that controls all of the scheduling, all these questions you're raising, this is an important part of our work at DEA right now, is to look at the existing regulations and the existing processes.
But it's hard, right? I want to draw from you the obvious admission that different states having different programs, and then the federal government having sort of an incongruent regulatory system with the hemp law and Schedule I being maintained, that is confusing.
And we deal with it, Congressman, all the time.
And it makes it harder, right? The fact that it's patchwork does probably make the job of DEA agents harder.
Even look at xylazine right now, which is something we're having conversations about, is lacing fentanyl. It is certain states have now moved to schedule xylazine. It has not yet been scheduled in the federal government. So these are challenges we face all the time.
And I would just also add, there's a huge research potential to unlock if we get this right, and I certainly hope that we do. And I appreciate your commitment to gild the lily at HHS and get that work product in your hands.
So there you heard it right there. That was last year in July. That was Congressman Matt Gaetz questioning DEA Chief Ann Milgram right then why the rescheduling process hadn't moved along any further, any faster. And, I'm not somebody that's very familiar with Gaetz. He's a Florida congressman. I'm here in Illinois. I have said many times on the show, I'm not overly political. I know it comes up a lot on the show, but only as it regards to cannabis and the hope that I have, and I'm imagining that you share, that it will be rescheduled, eventually decriminalized, and we can all just kind of have it as a normal part of our day-to-day lives. To hear from him, Gaetz, who is now President-elect Trump's nominee to be the U.S. Attorney General and lead the Justice Department, that is his opinion that you just heard him voice last year. This isn't 20 years ago either. This is last year, questioning the DEA why this hadn't been done already. So my point to you is this. People have their different opinions about the guy who is occupying what I like to call America's throne there in the Oval Office. And whatever your opinion is of that person, they have a whole administration who heads the U.S. federal government. Lots of different departments doing lots of different things. Lots of bees buzzing around the hive responsible for different tasks. This particular bee, this guy, Matt Gaetz, is possibly 2 months away from leading the Justice Department and being in the position of U.S. Attorney General. That position might allow him enough sway to actually get this thing done, to actually reschedule cannabis from 1 to Schedule 3. I'm certainly very hopeful for that after listening to that video. I hope you are too. But it's not just that, and it's not just me that's reacting this way. The U.S. Cannabis Council, the USCC, you may recall my conversations with David Culver, who's Senior Vice President for Public Affairs at USCC. He put out a statement this week on Wednesday that Gaetz was, quote, one of the most pro-cannabis Republicans on Capitol Hill. By tapping him to serve as the nation's top law enforcement officer, President-elect Trump is signaling his commitment to make good on his campaign promises around cannabis reform, Culver added. The statement from USCC goes on with Gaetz as Attorney General. The U.S. could see the passing of the Safe Banking Act, which would ensure that financial institutions are protected from being penalized by federal regulators for working with state legal cannabis businesses. Under Gaetz, marijuana could also be reclassified as a Schedule 3 drug, meaning it would be defined as having a moderate to low potential for physical and psychological dependence and could be used for medicinal purposes. As a Schedule 1 drug, marijuana is currently classified as having a high abuse risk, no pun intended, and therefore no acceptable medical use, which obviously, and as I've pointed out on the show, and as I'm sure you're well aware of by now, is a freaking joke. The fact that we have, right now, 24 states that have legalized it for adults to use recreationally. And we now, after the most recent elections, have 40 states that have legalized it medicinally. So you've got almost the entirety of the United States who has legalized cannabis medically in some form. And yet it remains Schedule 1 with no acceptable medical use. Obviously, that's a ridiculous place to be. It is hypocritical. It flies in the face of not only what states have chosen to do, but the evidence, which is becoming more and more undeniable by the day. And I, for one, upon seeing that news this week that Matt Gaetz could be our next Attorney General, that to me, and the statement from the USCC, sounds to me like we really could be right on track for rescheduling early next year. And there's one news story that's related to this topic and the rescheduling and the DEA and all of this timeline and everything that I want to share with you. This was an article published last week, November 8th. Marijuana Moment is the publication. You know that I'm a fan of theirs. I've linked it below. I always recommend you read their stuff, sign up for their newsletter, subscribe if you'd like. They do great journalistic work at Marijuana Moment. And there's an article here from Kyle Yeager last week published that reads, the headline anyway, researcher asks federal court to halt DEA marijuana rescheduling hearings over allegations of illegal proceedings and agency bias. The article goes on. I won't read the whole thing, but follow along. It's linked below if you like, and check out the whole thing for yourself. But I'll give you the meat of it. A marijuana and psychedelics researcher has filed a lawsuit in federal court alleging that the DEA violated multiple laws in setting a hearing to further consider the Biden administration's cannabis rescheduling proposal, and he's asking for an order halting the proceedings until those issues are resolved. In a complaint filed with the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Washington Monday, last week, Panacea Plant Sciences founder and CEO David Heldreth laid out several allegations against DEA that he says warrant judicial intervention in the agency's plan to hold an administrative hearing on the Justice Department's proposal to move cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 of the Controlled Substances Act. An initial hearing was scheduled for December 2nd, coming months after a public comment period closed earlier in the summer. Panacea was among numerous organizations that requested to take part in the hearing, but it was not among the 25 witnesses selected by DEA Administrator Ann Milgram late last month. Heldreth said in the court filing that the agency's hearing should be stayed for 4 main reasons, including alleged violations of a Clinton-era executive order requiring federal bodies to consult with tribal entities on rulemaking decisions that impact them, as well as the Regulatory Flexibility Act and Small Business Regulatory Enforcement Fairness Act. Notably, he also argued that his and Panacea's exclusion from the hearing appears to be retaliatory, calling it, quote, a punishment for challenging DEA rulemaking and other legal activities, end quote. That, as Kyle goes on to say, refers to Panacea's separate efforts to block DEA from moving forward with its proposed ban on various psychedelic compounds. In 2022, for example, the company was among those in the scientific community that pushed back against the agency's plans to prohibit 2 psychedelic compounds that they said hold significant therapeutic potential. A DEA administrative judge also recently denied the agency's request to block a series of witnesses from the psychedelics hearing, including Panacea. And evidentiary exhibits in a forthcoming hearing on its plans to ban the psychedelics, which I'm not going to try and pronounce. Those are spelled out. Good job, Kyle, for spelling those out in the article here. The quote goes on, the DEA administrator has shown in previous hearings that she oversteps legal boundaries and is now continuing that by punishing Panacea Plant Sciences and myself for resisting the DEA's attempts to ban psychedelics, Heldreth told Marijuana Moment last Friday. Additionally, the DEA did not follow tribal consultation or small organization consultation regulations or laws. These violations require the rule to be withdrawn and redone correctly. The legal complaint seeks an injunction against defendants barring any further administrative proceedings or scheduling attempts on marijuana and staying any hearings or deadlines in the administrative proceedings until this case is heard. The initial hearing in the matter is still scheduled for December 2nd, but as I mentioned on a recent show, DEA Chief Administrative Law Judge John Mulrooney issued a preliminary order last week signaling that the information provided by the agency on those set to testify was insufficient and requesting additional details and potential availability for a formal hearing in January or February of 2025. That is all of the article I'm going to read, but this lawsuit really gets at the heart of what I have said on the show multiple times this year. It's been a big year for cannabis rescheduling, for moving toward decriminalization. But as I've said during this whole calendar year of 2024, the DEA was never going to just speed walk this toward the finish line. It goes against their very self-interest to reschedule cannabis. Forget about descheduling. Even moving it down to Schedule 3 from Schedule 1 still goes against the DEA's self-interest. And this lawsuit, filed by Panacea Plant Sciences, good name, by the way, I enjoy that, slightly alliterative, which is great. This lawsuit is saying the same thing, that the DEA chief, Ann Milgram, regularly crosses boundaries, oversteps. They even accuse her and the DEA of making it personal, retaliatory actions against them, the company. But this notion of the judge pushing back the hearing and the DEA wanting more information about witnesses, all of this stuff is just legal hopscotch to kick the can down the road. And I will say that from my vantage point here, I thought during this year that the DEA was waiting to see how the election turned out, and I would bet that they were hoping they would get an unfriendly candidate or, DOJ leader, the Attorney General nominee. I would be betting that they were hoping to get someone in that seat who was not as friendly to cannabis reform as the Biden administration or Vice President Harris or even President-elect Trump has shown to be. But now that we know that Trump has nominated Matt Gaetz, and you heard that audio I played for you earlier today, we know that the DEA did not get what it was hoping for. And I certainly hope that by this time next year, cannabis will be Schedule 3 and on its way to where it should be, which is off of the Controlled Substances Act entirely. And I honestly don't really care if the federal government legalizes it. They didn't do that for alcohol. I don't expect them to do that for cannabis. But what I do expect is for them to get out of the way and let states do what they want. And let cannabis businesses get all the same support that other businesses and companies and other industries get from the financial institutions, being able to market their products appropriately, not getting squashed by algorithms on social media, not being, not having TV stations not run those ads. Just get out of the way and let people who have chosen cannabis is right for them, people like myself, let those of us who have decided that make it a normal part of our day-to-day lives. I say it on the show all the time, and I'll say it again. I don't believe cannabis is right for everybody, and that's not what I'm preaching here. But I do believe it's right for a lot of us. And for those of us for whom it is right, we should be afforded the same freedoms and normalcy as people who use alcohol, caffeine, sugar, any of the normalized, accepted substances that have been allowed in society for years now. So that's my stance on this. That is all I've got for you today. Again, I've linked all the articles I talked about below. Check them out for yourself. Send me a text about anything I talked about today. What do you think about the rescheduling effort? What do you think Matt Gaetz is going to do as head of the Justice Department? Do you think that we'll make it to Schedule 3 by next, let's call it summer? Have you tried any of Sweet Buzz's delicious sweets and gotten a buzz from trying those? If you've checked out the Cookie Got Creamed or Peanut Butter, any of their Sweet Somethings multi-pack, or their signature Sweet Sparks. If you haven't, try them out. Text me. Let me know what you think. Oh, that's right. And I forgot there was something new that I wanted to debut on this week's episode. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce you to the Cannabis Man Haiku. This week's haiku is unsponsored. It's brought to you by no one. But just sit back. Let the smoke carry you away. This themed poem is about politics and hope. Votes cast. Winners rise. Losers fade, but hope remains. Next dawn brings new light. Yeah. A haiku from me to you. Follow the show at C-Man Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. Just joined Blue Sky as well. Gonna get a show account up for that. I'm also the Cannabis Man pages on Facebook and YouTube. Be sure to leave a rating or a review, subscribe to the show, leave some comments, and share it with your friends. Tell people who are interested in cannabis, or if you know somebody with a cannabis business that you think that they should get some promotion, or maybe they want to advertise their business, send them my way. And if you like what I'm doing here, do leave the rating, but also subscribe to the Weekly Chronic newsletter, which you can do below in those description notes as well. The link will take you to Substack. It's free. And you can just get a newsletter in your email inbox every Tuesday morning talking about news stories, product reviews, perspectives, and behind-the-scenes looks from the Cannabis Man podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to reach out to those you love. Give them a hug. We're approaching the holidays, so, all this political stuff, all the tension from the year of the election, I'm telling you, that stuff's not worth it, man. There's going to be a time at the end of things. Nobody knows when our time is up, but I promise you, when your number's called, you will regret the time you lost with the people you care about over stupid disagreements over things that don't matter. It's never worth it to hold a grudge. It's never worth it to deny yourself connections that are meaningful to you and time spent with those people. So go spend some time to them, reach out, give a hug, and enjoy your weekend. And we'll talk next week on the Cannabis Man podcast. Bye-bye. Cannabis Man is 100% originally crafted by myself, Don Kleppen. Original theme music written and composed by Yusu Kim, aka Good Son.